Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the CIISec Masterclass. As you can see by the slide that's on the screen, this one is going to be around data-centric security and ransomware. So two topics rolled into one session today, but we'll pause in between for questions, and I'll go through that a little bit in more detail in a second. Before we get started, I'll just run you through our house rules. If you're a CIISec member, then you might be aware of these already if you've attended our events online. If not, then welcome to this masterclass. This is brought to you from CIISec. Specifically, our Southwest branch chair is hosting this one. As you can see, you will be muted during the webinar, but please do type any questions you have for our speakers through to us using the Q&A box. And we'll pick those up, like I say, in two sections. So we'll pause for some questions after about 20 minutes or so after the first section of the presentation. Then we'll pick up for the other questions at the end. If you have any problems, which hopefully you don't, then please do let us know. It's probably best to email us at support@ciisec.org, use an email that's there on the screen, and we'll do our best to help with anything that's going on there. I'll just repeat myself for anybody that has joined a little bit later. This masterclass is focusing on data-centric security and ransomware. I'm sure you know this, having registered, but we've got two brilliant speakers here today. We've got our host to begin with, who is Peter Jones. He's a full member of CIISec and the Southwest branch chair for CIISec as well. But aside from that, he's a highly experienced security professional in digital forensics. Really fascinating background. Peter will introduce you to our speaker, but before we do get started, I just wanted to make you aware of some of the upcoming events that we have going on. Firstly, as you can see at the top there, we've got Secure Southwest 15, which is tomorrow. As you can see, it's an event that runs from 8:30 till 5, and they're both virtual and face-to-face elements. So if you're around Plymouth and you'd like to attend, then please do so. I'll pop the link to register for that in the chat shortly. We'd love to see you there, obviously. And the next CIISec Masterclass that's coming is on the 8th of April. That's a virtual one, a lunchtime session around cyber and information security vulnerabilities on the humanitarian frontline. That one is brought by another one of our CIISec branch chairs, John Amer, and we'd love to see you attend, like I say. So I'll hand over to Peter to get us started with the introductions. And as I say, we hope you enjoy, and do type your questions through to us. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and good afternoon and welcome everybody to this talk. The CIISec Southwest branch is brought to you, which sounds a bit like Sesame Street, but from Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster. We meet every second Friday every month, which you're more than welcome to attend. You don't actually have to be in the Southwest. We're just like all the other cluster groups in the country, and you can register through our website. Or come and see us tomorrow in Plymouth. Well, I'm more than excited to present to you Nigel Thorpe, who's joined us from Secure Age, and we get back and get one free today with Nigel. We've got two talks into roll one, but so what we're going to do is Nigel's going to talk for 20 minutes or so. Feel free to throw your questions and answers into the Q&A section. We'll try and answer them on the fly. Nigel may answer them later on, or I'll pick them up and we'll talk about them in the interlude, so to speak, and then we'll continue with the second half of the presentation. So please don't wait to the end. Throw your questions in nice and early, and I'm sure Nigel will be more than happy to answer your questions. So Nigel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Off to you.
Let me find the button. Hopefully that's sharing my screen. Thanks very much for that. So today I'm going to talk about the two subjects as mentioned, which are very much distinct but very much also entwined. Data really is the lifeblood of any organization. Without it, modern organizations simply couldn't function. There's many examples out there, one being the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, which I'm sure you know suffered a ransom attack last year. It's still rebuilding its systems, and the full financial impact isn't known still, but data was stolen from the organizations, their systems were crippled, and all of this dramatically upset their ability to function. Cyber criminals are very well aware of this dependency on data, which is why it's such a good target. And when you add in the fact that the likelihood of getting caught caught is vanishingly slim, it's obvious why ransomware continues to be the top cybersecurity threat. So my two subject areas today are, as Sophie mentioned, data security and then ransomware. By blocking ransomware, your data security is improved by denying the relatively simple access for cyber criminals, and by taking a data-centric approach to security, the more determined and resourceful cyber criminal can also be defeated. So let's start with data security and this data-centric security approach. Mainstream thinking on information security revolves around technologies such as access controls, data loss prevention, classification, and generally protecting data storage locations. The underlying data, however, remains untouched. So if, for example, a cyber criminal manages to elevate their privilege once inside a network, data is relatively easy to steal. I can see three significant problems with the mainstream approaches to data security. Firstly, this audience is acutely aware that there's no such thing as 100% information security. We have to assume that some unauthorized party will gain network and system access. My second problem is that the IT department doesn't know what data is out there, where it is, or what it's doing on the network. Frequently, users download data from secure systems to local drives where they found it's easier to work on, especially when working from home. I've recently been working with a financial services organization where they realized that many of their users had hundreds of gigabytes of data stored on their local system drives. However, this data had no strong protection in breach of compliance requirements. Data is frequently considered secure because it's expected to be kept within a secure system or data vault. Clearly, by removing the data from its secure location, it no longer benefits from the normal higher level of protection. My final concern is that data is not like a physical thing. Data, once stolen, can be published internationally in an instant. It can be manipulated and republished, can be sold many times over, can allow a competitor to replicate intellectual property, and can embarrass organizations and individuals. In short, data can be used to destroy an organization. So let's have a look at these 3 points in a bit more detail. You have to assume that your organization will suffer a breach of some kind. Broadly speaking, there are 3 ways in for the cyber criminal. Firstly, by duping a system user into executing malware or otherwise opening a back door. We'll come back to ransomware and malware later. Secondly, by having access to a user account, either stolen, purchased, or guest credentials, and not forgetting the disgruntled insider. And thirdly, by exploiting a vulnerability or infrastructure component, for example, a VPN bug or an unpatched system. The VPN password route is reportedly how the Colonial Pipeline incident started. Given the speed of ransom payment in that case, it seems likely that critical infrastructure organizations will continue to be targeted by cyber criminals. If the stolen data had been encrypted in a way where it remained scrambled when it was copied to the cyber criminal's storage, then the loss of around 100 gigabytes of data would not have been a concern with regard to information exposure. It would have been what I might call reverse ransomware, making the stolen data useless to criminals. Having a look at the second concern, data could be anywhere, and we don't even know what the data is. Some organizations I speak with implement a policy whereby data is tightly secured where it's held in a central system. The data security silos include databases, document management systems, and increasingly cloud storage. Many of the security mechanisms used are very comprehensive, sometimes employing multi-factor authentication, zero trust networks, and access control systems, which is all great, but frequently the security doesn't take account real life. In real life, people export data from applications, databases, and file stores for all sorts of reasons. It could be for research, for data analysis, and even just for getting around the system. Then we need to add in all those ad hoc documents which get created to help with planning, corporate finances, and reporting. And you'll find that information is spread far and wide. As an example, many treasury departments in financial organizations could not survive without Excel. Money and risk management is commonly conducted using spreadsheets, which contain highly sensitive information that's fundamental to the stability of the institution. And these spreadsheets are stored on local hard drives. This is all made worse with our new home and hybrid working environments where security measures are weaker and where staff are more likely to cut corners than when in the office. According to a 2020 report by Apricorn, more than half of the IT decision makers in the UK believe that remote workers will expose their organisation to the risk of data theft. In 2020, the Woodruff Institute, randomly picked, they are a dermatology and plastic surgery specialist in Florida, had some data stolen. Accounts and patient details were stolen, with all the data simply held in folders of multiple files. Clearly, these files were not sufficiently well protected, and once stolen, could easily be opened to view their contents. And I can't move on without mentioning an old story, the Equifax data breach. I'm sure you know all about this, so I won't dwell on it, other than to mention the plain text files which cybercriminals found on a server. It contained administrator credentials for multiple systems. Clearly, it must have been against security policy to create and store such a file, but real life is like that. People don't always do what they're meant to. A universal data-centric approach to encryption, rather than the traditional storage silo and hardware-oriented approach, could have defeated both of these breaches. If all files had been encrypted, no matter where they were stored or copied, then the data would have been useless to the criminals. Clearly, any IT security measures must take into account that real people doing their jobs will sometimes act in unexpected ways. If an IT security inspection simply examines how a network and its systems can be broken into, then it's missing the point that a successful attack means that cybercriminal has gained access and data is then there for the taking. And since data can be found at the endpoint in network stores or within ad hoc folders created by an administrator on a server, then the protection of this information should have been part of the whole security process. After all, the cybercriminal would be looking for exactly the same files. Let's move on to my third concern, where data is not like a physical thing and should not be treated as such. If a car is stolen, the owner doesn't have it anymore. And if the police recover it, the owner gets the car back and the criminal no longer has it. Of course, data doesn't work that way. Cybercriminals, if undetected, can steal data over a long period of time. And organizations have been known not to be aware of such theft for even years. Once data is out there, it can be traded and used in further criminal activities such as identity theft, targeted phishing, or selling user credentials so that ransomware attacks can be executed. Black Cat, the relatively new ransomware as a service group, benefits from this kind of activity. The group supplies the attack tools, while the affiliate hacker needs to find their own way into the chosen target network. Purchasing user credentials is a quick way of achieving access so that a variety of other hacking tools can then be used to map out the network, gain administrator privilege, and exfiltrate data. And finally, other Black Cat tools are used to corrupt and disable systems in the network. Black Cat uses the Rust programming language, which reduces the chances of ransomware executables being detected by malware security researchers. In addition, it's fast, enabling it to find and encrypt files on targeted networks rapidly. And finally, it's not just a double extortion tool. It issues a ransom demand and threatens both data publication and a denial of service attack if the cybercriminal's demands are not met. Now that the rival group no longer operates, affiliate cybercriminals are migrating to Black Cat, especially where the payouts are up to 90% of the ransom demand. There are others, of course, such as the Lapsus group, who are allegedly carried out the data breaches at NVIDIA and Samsung, where large amounts of proprietary data and source code have been stolen. Ransomware victims are increasingly finding themselves in a position of further extortion after the first attack. When the first ransom was paid, did we really believe the cyber criminals would destroy the data they stole? Maybe not. And what if stolen data is embarrassing to either the organization or an individual? In the case of the renewable energy company, Invenergy, the stolen data not only included contacts and project details, but also reportedly very personal and spicy information about the CEO. While company resources generally shouldn't be used for that kind of thing, who's going to question the CEO? Insider data theft also remains a problem. Tesla, for example, suffered that kind of breach at the hands of a disgruntled employee who wrote code to export masses of data, including manufacturing processes, confidential photographs, and videos of manufacturing systems. The code was designed to export data even after the employee left the company. And of course, there's Edward Snowden, which was both an insider theft and which caused deep embarrassment for multiple government agencies in different countries. IT security measures must therefore extend right into the data. If data is stolen in a format which is readable by the cyber criminal, then its use is unlimited. On the other hand, if you build security right into data itself, then the criminal just has a disk full of rubbish. So what do I suggest? Encrypt everything. All data, all files, no question, no selection, and no choice. But we already encrypt everything, is often what I hear. But generally, everything means all data is encrypted when it's stored where it should be, in its security silo, the database, the application, the document management store, or in the cloud. But as I've said, people don't keep data where it's supposed to be all the time. Sometimes encrypting everything means all important information. That's fine, but how do you know where absolutely all the important information is? And who decides what's important enough to be encrypted? And how much time do they spend on this task? And what are the spicy information related to Invenergy's CEO? Should that have been marked as important? Information classification is frequently used in this context. It's a useful tool, but if it's used to drive security policy, then there are issues. Weighing the balance too much towards automation results in sensitive information being misclassified, and giving the user too much choice also results in wrongly categorized documents. After all, people tend to do what's easiest and not what's necessarily that which is most secure. People do unexpected things. And sometimes everything means that the organization has rolled out full disk encryption to their systems. I recently became aware of one large organization that suffered a cyber attack which involved data theft. One major decision following this incident was to mandate that full disk encryption should be implemented on all corporate systems and also on all systems used by all suppliers to the organization. It was felt that this was how they could ensure security throughout the supply chain. Full disk encryption is all about encrypting physical devices. Correct me if I'm wrong, but surely it's the data that has value, not where it happens to be stored. BitLocker is provided as part of Windows. The information provided by Microsoft about BitLocker suggests that it's a great way of protecting your files and folders against theft. This kind of security system encrypts all information on a hard drive, with cryptographic processes happening at a low level so that the user is unaware of this activity. The encryption keys themselves are asymmetric, so they're used for both encryption and decryption. There's no data level authentication other than the password or token that's used to unlock the entire drive in the first place. And once the drive is unlocked and the system is running, full disk encryption enforces no control over who gets decrypted access to data on the drive. So every process, legitimate or malign, is provided with decrypted data. And when information is copied to another drive, it gets decrypted without question. Full disk encryption is effectively no encryption at all on a running system. In fact, that's the beauty of it. it's completely invisible once your system is running. The administrator doesn't need to work out what to encrypt, and the user doesn't get to choose whether to encrypt a file or not. The last time I checked, data theft that involves ransomware, backdoors, compromised user accounts, social engineering, and phishing all rely on running systems. According to the 2020 Data Breach Investigations report, only 4% of all data theft was as a result of physical actions. And physical actions include not only theft of laptops and disk drives, but also theft of paperwork. So if you leave your laptop on the train or you're careless about hard drive disposal, then full disk encryption has got you covered. But it doesn't really cover the other 96% of data theft. So what about file level encryption? It's too difficult, they say. But why? The main concern is that file level encryption implies lots of configuration, deciding what needs encrypting and what doesn't. And sometimes the user is given the choice to encrypt or not. And we all know what happens when faced with that kind of decision. We don't have those deliberations about deploying full disk encryption. We accept that everything gets encrypted. We really must take the same approach with file level encryption. And then we won't need to spend time deciding what to encrypt and what to leave plain. With a universal file level encryption approach, you can't end up with new locations that are not protected because the default will be to encrypt everything. A malicious process may be able to copy files outside the network, but with a data-centric universal file level encryption approach, those files remain encrypted and therefore useless to the cybercriminal. The purpose of information security is not to protect the infrastructure or hardware, but to protect the data being stored and the process and processed within it. It's no longer sufficient trying to secure just known devices, networks, and storage locations. A security regime that focuses only on the infrastructure is a difficult, complex, and increasingly ineffective approach, especially as organizations embrace cloud services and home working. Data-centric security delivers persistent protection of data at source. With this inherent protection, data remains secure no matter which device, network, or cloud service it ends up on. And there we are.
Thank you very much for that, Nigel. There's some really interesting points that you've raised already. In terms of using file level encryption, has technology made that life a lot easier? One of the concerns back in the day, which really wasn't that long ago, it would reduce performance, reduce efficacy of an infrastructure, particularly bigger the company is. From your experience, is that a thing of the past?
It is. I mean, it has to be said that if you are individually looking into each file to check authorization and also to authentication and also to decrypt each file, then there will always be an overhead. But with modern technology, with cryptographic processes built in as a separate, the AES-NI instruction set built into modern processors, then the actual cryptographic processes are faster than I/O, typically speaking. And at the same time, you have faster I/O as well anyway. The whole thing becomes transparent, so that also kind of stealing some of the technology from full disk encryption, which deals with the fact that you don't want to be, if you are processing a very large database file, for example, gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes, you really don't want to have to decrypt the whole thing to be able to edit it. So by using particular types of encryption technology, you can manage effectively streaming data from the encrypted state on the disk into memory as required, so that you are minimizing the amount of data that you're encrypting or decrypting at any time. So yeah, modern technology does enable the ability to process data without noticing that those crypto processes are going on.
I'm sure it can flip the other way though. Is there then an educational need on encryption from a point of view of the arms race of bad ciphers, bad algorithms, software development where they're still using defunct protocols? All these things, are we just preaching to the wrong people, preaching to converted, and we're never going on top of it? Or is it an education process we can do better?
Definitely an education process. I mean, I suppose one of the issues with encryption is that it's been around for a long time. It's been around for centuries in reality. But in terms of IT, yes, we have this legacy of older crypto technologies, which as an organization, you can mandate that you're using AES for the sake of argument. But if some member of your supply chain is using very easily cracked technology, then weaknesses start creeping into the organization, or potentially creeping in. And this really is one of the reasons that I would advocate this kind of file level encryption, whereby you have authentication also built into that process. So rather than the sort of full disk encryption approach of effectively opening everything up with a single key, if you build authentication into the process as well, you improve the resilience of the whole system. The other end of the argument that also comes up is quantum cryptography. And the scary stories about being able to crack our nice, shiny, modern crypto techniques that we're using today, being able to crack those in seconds. There are quantum safe encryption algorithms, but right now they're not practical. They are simply not fast enough. So we really have two ends of the spectrum. I'm not seeing quantum cryptography as a realistic proposition at the moment, but equally quantum computing, I suppose there's an argument to be said that the ransomware criminals are making millions of dollars. Maybe they're the people that can spend money on it, but I suspect that's not a focus.
I suppose when we talk about technology and how things are improvement, there's obviously now becoming a bit of a focus on automation. You talked about classification.
Mm-hmm.
Can we, or is it realistic to use automation like a safety net? So when they do try to put onto local drives, try to do something that's not typical, automation either stops it or does encryption on the fly. Or are we just defeating the objective and we're going back to the educational side of things?
I think the problem with any kind of automation, you look at all sorts of systems, classification systems, data loss prevention systems. They will work for the vast majority of times, but the little bit that you miss is based on the fact that you're building a system which is trying to protect your data based on your prediction as to the activity that's going to go into stealing that data. And cyber criminals know this, and they're very clever. So they will attempt to work out how to beat your predictions and come up with something brand new. So I think automation is an important tool in the armory, but it's not the full answer. Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions that have come in now, Joel, since we've been speaking. So thank you very much to the audience. Again, just remember you've got the Q&A section. You can pop some questions. So Dudley has asked the question: do any of the large cloud providers offer any services to implement DCS?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I'm sorry.
I'm sure we can come back to you there on Dudley.
Yeah.
So the second question's come from, I might butcher this slightly, so I'm just going to say Dr. Wynn. So different processes need different access requirements for the same file. He would like to know how universal full disk encryption addresses this.
I mean, there are a couple of approaches to this. One is to effectively have, I've mentioned having the idea of authentication built into this whole universal file level encryption. So one approach is to simply share a single key amongst a group of users that need access to the same data. And the other is to effectively build the each of the sharing members' keys into that authentication process. And there are pros and cons to each. The shared key approach is sort of nice and neat, but has the problem that when somebody you effectively want to kick someone out of that shared data pool, if you like, then well, they've still got the key, so that's a potential security issue. The approach whereby you have multiple keys effectively built into the data, when you get to the stage of having very, very large numbers of sharers, then that becomes more of a management overhead in terms of the data that's being stored, each individual's key. But there are technologies to deal with that, and certainly can be made completely invisible to the end user. So effectively, you have a folder of files, and 50 people can share those files, and all the encryption and decryption just happens magically in the background.
Great stuff. Well, I think that leads us nicely into the second half of your presentation, Nigel. So back over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Peter asked me when we ran through this earlier whether I mocked up the hula hoops things myself. To my shame, I didn't. I found it. I wish I had done it now. So yes, let's move to ransomware. Both the EU Agency for Cybersecurity and our own National Cybersecurity Centre say that ransomware continues to be the top cybersecurity threat, and certainly organisations that I've spoken with regularly say that what keeps the boss up at night is ransomware. So cybersecurity, cyber criminals exploit the fact that organizations still haven't found a way of staying ahead of this kind of attack, and the potentially massive financial returns of ransomware business cyber criminals have invested in successfully evading capture. I know I don't need to hammer home the dangers of ransomware. Just last month, KP Snacks, which is where my hula hoops come in, fell victim, warning its customers that it couldn't safely process orders or dispatch goods, with delays possibly lasting until the end of March. Not sure where they are, actually. Clearly, when there's a shortage of hula hoops on the horizon, we must consider something. I just like hula hoops. In the early days of the computer virus, signature-based and antivirus systems soon became a necessity. But as cyber criminals' arsenal grew through the polymorphic and the packed file viruses, these signature-based solutions no longer offered the level of protection that we need. New and morphed viruses began to emerge more and more quickly, leading to devastating zero-day attacks. In fact, the whole process of keeping virus signature files up to date across the enterprise became a significant operational challenge. Developments such as the personal firewall and what would later be known as host-based intrusion prevention began to emerge, but still malware was able to find its way into organizations' networks. Cybersecurity response to malware over time is paralleled by the world's rapid education and response to COVID-19. Over time, we've developed responses to new attacks in a piecemeal fashion, creating an IT industry security defenses such as behavioral analysis, machine learning, threat intelligence, security monitoring, and incident analysis and response. These are all combined to hone the aims of the endpoint protection platform and of endpoint detection and response. So they're able to identify the bad and, ideally, to block it. But cyber criminals haven't stopped innovating either. They use phishing, targeted or spear phishing attacks, social engineering, deepfakes, attacks on home workers via Wi-Fi and VPNs, and of course, plain old bribery. All aiming to deploy malware, compromise a user account, or open a backdoor. And once inside, they'll work their way around the network, identifying and exfiltrating data. And all the while, they deploy malware bombs to detonate when ready, which could be months later. Cyber criminals are generally pretty clever. They're always on the lookout for new ways of avoiding their malware being detected as something suspicious. And judging by the constant stream of successful ransomware attacks we see in the news, it's the cyber criminals who are always one step ahead. According to SonicWall, 5.6 billion malware attacks took place in 2020. So the legitimate organization is at a disadvantage already. The cyber criminal needs perhaps just 1 or 2 attacks to get through so they can buy their dream island. The organization, on the other hand, has to defend against every attack, not only the mass blanket variety, but also the highly targeted. The mainstream defense is essentially to identify malware. Much research and constantly renewed technology goes into spotting malicious behavior, suspicious processes, and unexplained events. A huge industry involving a wide range of technology and human expertise has evolved, all with the aim of detecting bad stuff. The problem with this approach is that malware constantly changes the way it looks and behaves. After all, any techie, when faced with a problem, will work day and night to find a way around the latest roadblock. Cyber criminals are very clever techies. When one door is slammed in their face, they work to open another one which is not going to get detected by the cyber defense tools, at least not in the short term. They change the behavior of their malware so that it no longer presents itself as appearing malicious. And this is the time when cyber attacks get through the corporate defenses. The legitimate organization is one step behind, always. And then we need to add real life back in. Real business IT users are not, and should not be expected to be, security experts. They're often in a hurry and under pressure, so a well-crafted phishing email is easy to miss, even if the cybersecurity training was only a few hours ago. And those highly targeted attacks are carefully crafted to look and feel genuine. Last year, IKEA suffered from email reply chain attacks. Here, the attacker simply replies to a perfectly legitimate corporate email, including their malware in the message. The recipient of the reply is likely to consider the email harmless because it appears to have come from one of their colleagues. And now we've got malware being distributed within hacked Microsoft Teams meetings. Business users rightly expect that these online sessions are private and secure, so a message within Teams chat should be trustworthy. Wouldn't it be better to implement an approach which coped with people making mistakes, and which wasn't trying to identify the almost infinite range of new tweaks to new malware? So I ask a question. What does a typical business PC look like? At the moment, it's probably Windows 10 with Microsoft Office installed, maybe Teams or Zoom, and a selection of business applications, some installed locally and many web-based. My point here is that most business endpoints are configured to a standard build. The IT department works with the business to establish exactly what software needs to be on the endpoint. They know exactly what is installed on each machine and therefore what is authorized to run. So we already know which processes should be allowed to run on the PC. Or to turn that on its head, we know that everything else should not be running. So why do we continue to use anti-malware software and services which are trying to identify harmful software, scripts, and malicious behavior? Why not just block everything which is not pre-approved? This isn't a new idea. Some kind of application or process control has been part of or available for all major operating systems for a while. The idea is that you build a list of processes which are authorized, then any process which is not on the list is not allowed to execute. It's like the bouncer on the nightclub door. If you're not on the list, you're not coming in. And on a business PC with a standard build, this should be pretty straightforward. So why don't we all work this way? I believe there's two reasons. Firstly, we've all got so used to deploying mainstream anti-malware commodity products that it's just the way it is. No one's going to get fired for installing one of these off-the-shelf systems, or even multiple, all at the same time. And because the mainstream vendors have become commodity, they've invested heavily in evolving their products, improving their ability to identify and detect malware and ransomware, which is fine as long as the malware you face is one which your system is able to detect. The well-funded anti-malware industry has invested heavily in their technology and services, and therefore wants to keep your custom, constantly keeping the focus away from the much simpler process control approach, which doesn't even bother trying to decide if something is bad or not. The second reason for not deploying process control is that many implementations are difficult to set up and maintain. Just establishing the initial list of approved processes can be complicated. And in our environment where applications are updated regularly, some process control systems don't cope very well. I'm not advocating the complete removal of all endpoint protection systems and replacement with process control. After all, endpoint protection usually has a whole range of capabilities beyond that of preventing execution of malware. Rather, I suggest that you consider process or application control as another IT security layer. With a modern process control system, the difficulties of configuration and maintenance are dealt with so that users are not disrupted while they're doing all the right things. In fact, with this kind of approach, your users can safely have a bad day, clicking all the links in all the phishing emails and malicious websites they like. They just might be slightly bemused that none of it seems to do anything. But that's got to be better than the alternative. Going back to ransomware and its wider definition, the typical attack involves both data exfiltration and system disruption. It's this double or triple extortion which provides the cyber criminal with their hostage and subsequent demand for payment. Just this morning, I read further information about the cyber attack at JDC Healthcare Management, where the health records of around 1 million Texans were stolen. They've now explained that malware gave unauthorized individuals access to the organization's IT systems from July to August last year. Once inside, the cybercriminals stole files containing patients' health information. By using a process control system to block malware and ransomware in the first place, you're able to prevent incidents such as these. That's great, we've stopped the malware from running. But if the cybercriminal gains network access through other means, like the compromised credentials used in the recent TransUnion data theft, then a data-centric approach to information security ensures that information remains protected and useless as a hostage and ransom demand, even when stolen. And what about the truly sophisticated attacks, such as that which SolarWinds suffers? This really is a major headache for security professionals. Organizations should be able to trust their supply chain, but clearly this trust can't always be relied on, particularly in our highly connected world. I believe that data-centric security should be a critical part of the data protection armory. With authenticated file-level encryption, SolarWinds could have prevented unauthorized code changes, and their customers could have prevented the loss of usable data if they too had implemented a data-centric security approach. In real life, people click on things they shouldn't. They store information in unexpected locations. They make mistakes and poor decisions. They have bad days, and sometimes they even deliberately act maliciously. Cyber criminals are experts in exploiting weaknesses such as these, so the combined approach of default deny, process control, together with default encrypt, data-centric security, provides a strong foundation for fighting back against the modern cyber criminal. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Nigel. That was really, really useful. Again, everybody, if you just want back any questions in the Q&A, otherwise Nigel gets the questions for myself. What's interesting though, Nigel, is a lot of businesses have been asked about compliance, and compliance is not always dictating how businesses should go. However, we've got this weird anomaly where a lot of businesses have been asked to test against the ICAR, for example, for like cyber essentials, which is fine. But when you start looking at your slide earlier about more modern tools that do next-gen antivirus checks, to do behavioral analysis, but yet we've got compliance standards that don't recognize next-gen antivirus. From a business point of view, we're crosshairs, aren't we? So is encryption our compensating control? Or are we saying, actually, when we talk about people's mistakes and process control, encryption is actually the answer, actually, to all our problems, leveraging technology based on the first half of your talk? That was a big question. I'm sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, it's a complex subject, and compliance regulations comes from committees that designed these things many years ago, and you're quite right. It rarely reflects modern technology, I suppose encryption has the benefit that encryption has been around for a long time and fundamentally hasn't changed. Yes, we have more modern ways of performing encryption and dealing with encrypted data, but the fundamental technology is the same. So you know, you look at GDPR type requirements that sort of helpfully suggest that encryption might be a good idea, which isn't very helpful. But you know, it has the benefit that it has been around and therefore should be accepted. Things like process control, again, regulators don't tend to be very helpful about this because, again, they tend not to suggest a particular technology. So it's a very difficult area. I suppose the other side of this is that it's very easy to fall into the trap of going back to full disk encryption. It's very easy to say, well, yes, we've got everything encrypted because we've got full disk encryption everywhere. But clearly, you know, that doesn't help if your system is running, then any malware can steal your data. I don't know if that really answers goes anywhere to answering the question, but
maybe it's a question for another day.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was sort of picking up on, and you sort of alluded to this in the first half of your presentation today, data breaches. So we've got a confirmed, let's say we've got a confirmed instance of ransomware, but actually you've done encryption and you've got some decent file level encryption. And you know, let's say, I don't know, 10,000 records have left your system, but they're all encrypted, and they're all gobbledygook, like you mentioned earlier. You know, where do you stand on the organization's stance of the breach? You know, should they be worried? Has the control actually worked? Or should we just be more worried the fact that ransomware was in the first place, regardless of the data being protected?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because, you know, the reality is that data, whether it's encrypted or not, if it's stolen, then it's been stolen, which sort of suggests that well, demonstrates that there is a hole in your defenses. The fact that it has been stolen and it's scrambled is a reassurance. Perhaps it's more of a PR thing than anything else, really. One of the things that always interests me, you see these organisations that have been attacked, and the PR statement comes out and it says, well, it's okay, yes, okay, they got into our systems, but they didn't steal any of your bank information or anything. Well, yes, but they got my name, my address, and my email address. It's that scale of what's been stolen. I think the organization, if all of the data is kept in this encrypted form in a way that when it's stolen it remains encrypted, I think you do have a very strong way of saying, yeah, okay, hands up, we had data encrypted, but there's no way that anyone else can access that data. So I think you do have that very strong basis to sit on, but perhaps it's a careful wording of it to ensure that from your customers, your public's point of view, that you're explaining carefully that there's no way that information can be cracked. I think from a regulator's point of view, I think that's absolutely fine. I think the regulator or compliance organisation would be happy that the data is encrypted and therefore useless. So I think perhaps it's more of a public or a customer angle that has to be handled more carefully.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an absolutely huge area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no more Q&As coming, Nigel. I want to say thank you very much. It's been a really interesting talk. I really enjoyed talking to you. Definitely some avenues we could probably talk for the rest of the evening, by the sound of it. And you've shared your details on there, so obviously anybody's interested, and I think we had a couple of questions that were probably easy to take offline, that hopefully people will reach out to yourself directly. And then on behalf of the Southwest branch for CIISec, again, thank you very much for speaking to this afternoon. And if you want to know more about what we're doing, again, going back to Sophie's point earlier in this conversation, Secure Southwest is happening tomorrow, and I'll be on stage again. But we've got some amazing speakers at Secure Southwest. We've got CrowdStrike there. We've got a number of organisations up and down the UK. We've got some local organisations all speaking about getting people into the industry. And it's not just talking about skills shortage, which seems to be a popular subject. We're going to be talking about actually how the hell we're going to do it, and actually talk about boards and talk about some real organisational struggles. So if you can join us virtually, even better if you can attend in Plymouth itself. The link is in the chat. Otherwise, again, this recording will be available through the CIISec website for members. And if you've enjoyed this, it's your first time watching one of the CIISec events, get in touch. We've got membership levels, everything from associate, student, affiliate, upwards. And then I'm sure after many years of working with us, you can achieve the golden title of fellow one day, which I'm sure we'll all love to ascertain one day. But yeah, thank you very much.